Have you ever felt like you don't belong in this world? That your deepest conversations happen only with yourself? There comes a moment in life when solitude stops being a choice and becomes a calling we cannot ignore. Maybe you've tried to fit in, follow the rhythm of others, but something inside you screams for silence. It's not depression. It's not giving up. It's something much deeper and more necessary. Today, we're going to explore why solitude might be your only path to true inner freedom. There are moments in human existence when solitude doesn't emerge as a deliberate option, but as a destiny that imposes itself with inevitable force. It's as if life conspires to push us away from crowds, empty conversations, and superficial connections that characterize our time. This solitude isn't the casual absence of company, but a deep calling that echoes from the most secret layers of our soul. When this happens, we try to resist. We seek distractions, social events, relationships that fill the void. But the calling persists, becoming louder and louder until we realize a disturbing truth. Perhaps our soul is preparing us for something that can only be discovered in complete solitude. It's a process that transcends our conscious will, moved by forces that operate beyond our immediate understanding. This solitary destiny isn't punishment or social failure. It's an invitation to an inner journey that few have the courage to undertake. Inevitable solitude forces us to confront questions we've always postponed, thoughts we've always avoided, and aspects of our personality we'd rather keep hidden. It's as if the universe decided it's time to look inward, even if that means temporarily distancing ourselves from everything we considered normal and safe. Carl Jung understood like few others that solitude opens doors to unexplored territories of the human psyche. In his words, it's in silence and isolation that we finally find courage to face our shadow head-on. That part of us we keep hidden not just from others, but mainly from ourselves. The shadow contains everything we reject, deny, or consider unacceptable in our personality. For years, we build a social persona, a carefully crafted mask to please, impress, or simply go unnoticed. This mask becomes so natural we forget there's an authentic self underneath it. Solitude forces these masks to fall, leaving us vulnerable before our own impulses, fears, and repressed desires. It's a frightening encounter, but absolutely necessary for those seeking to live a genuine life. Jung observed that the shadow isn't merely negative. It also contains creative potentials and vital aspects of our personality that were suppressed by social or family pressures. In solitude, these aspects emerge with renewed force, demanding recognition and integration. The process is painful because it means accepting that we're more complex, contradictory, and mysterious than we'd like to admit. But it's also liberating, as it allows us to stop wasting energy maintaining a facade that was never really ours. The shadow manifests in dreams, fantasies, unexplained irritations, and attractions we can't rationalize. In solitude, without external distractions, these manifestations become impossible to ignore. It's as if our psyche takes advantage of the quietude to finally present us with aspects of ourselves that had been exiled to the basements of consciousness. Friedrich Nietzsche had an even more radical view of solitude. For him, isolation wasn't just an opportunity for self-knowledge, but an absolute requirement for human greatness. Nietzsche saw solitude as fertile ground where original thinkers are born, creators of values, those who refuse to simply repeat what the crowd considers truth. In his perspective, the masses live in a state of conformity that prevents genuine thought. People support each other in their beliefs, creating a collective comfort zone that, while reassuring, is also intellectually and spiritually limiting. Nietzsche called this herd mentality, the human tendency to seek security in similarity, avoiding the discomfort of questioning established truths. The creative solitude Nietzsche defended isn't escape or resentment against the world. It's a conscious choice to step away from external influences long enough to discover what we really think, feel, and value. It's in silence that our inner voice, often muffled by social noise, can finally be heard with clarity. This voice might surprise us, contradicting beliefs we've carried for years and revealing aspirations we didn't even know existed. The German philosopher understood that creating new values, not just passive acceptance of inherited values, requires courage to remain alone with our thoughts long enough for something genuinely original to emerge. It's a process that can't be rushed or forced, but flourishes naturally when we create enough internal space for our authenticity to manifest. Within solitude dwells a silent teacher that few learn to hear. Silence isn't merely the absence of sound. It's an active presence that can teach, heal, or torment, depending on how we relate to it. For many, silence is unbearable because in it we hear echoes of questions we'd rather keep buried. But for those who develop courage to inhabit it, silence becomes a source of incomparable wisdom. In silence, we discover internal rhythms that the constant noise of the modern world prevents us from perceiving. There's a natural time for reflection, another for action, moments to question, and moments to simply be. These rhythms are unique to each person, but can only be discovered when we stop compulsively synchronizing with external clocks and schedules. Silence also reveals the difference between solitude and isolation. Isolation is cutting oneself off from the world out of fear, anger, or despair. Solitude, on the other hand, is consciously choosing moments of quietude to reconnect with our essence. In isolation, we lose ourselves. In solitude, we find ourselves. The difference lies in the quality of presence we bring to these moments of withdrawal. Many spiritual traditions have recognized the transformative power of silence. It's no coincidence that mystics, philosophers, and artists throughout history sought periods of retreat for their deepest discoveries. Silence doesn't just quiet external noise, it also calms internal noises, the voices of criticism, fear, and anxiety that constantly comment on our experience. When these commentaries diminish, a space of clearer and more intuitive perception emerges. One of the most painful experiences of deep solitude is the acute sensation of being a stranger in your own world. It's as if you spoke a language no one else understands, as if your values and worldviews were imperfect translations of something that has no equivalent in the social reality around you. This feeling of not belonging can be devastating, but it's also a sign that your consciousness is expanding beyond conventional limits. Jung and Nietzsche, each in their own way, identified this experience as a mark of individuals who are in the process of individuation or genuine self-affirmation. When we begin to think for ourselves, we inevitably distance ourselves from majority opinions and behaviors. This isn't arrogance. It's a natural consequence of developing an authentic perspective on life. The feeling of estrangement arises because our soul perceives it has grown beyond the social structures that once served as home. It's like a child who outgrows clothes that once fit perfectly. There's discomfort in growth, but trying to return to the previous size would be even more uncomfortable. The solution isn't to deny the growth, but to find new spaces where our expanded consciousness can dwell naturally. This experience of not belonging frequently comes accompanied by a sharp perception of the limitations and contradictions of the social world. We see through masks that others still consider genuine faces. We recognize power games that go unnoticed by most. This clarity of vision is both gift and burden. It makes us wiser, but also lonelier. There is, however, a real danger in deep solitude: the possibility of total alienation. When withdrawal from the world becomes so extreme that we completely lose the capacity to relate to other people and shared reality, solitude transforms into prison. It's a thin line between necessary retreat for self-knowledge and pathological isolation that disconnects us from life. Jung warned that the inward journey must be balanced with the capacity to return to the outer world. Individuation isn't permanent escape, but a cycle of retreat and return, where each phase of solitude prepares us for more authentic engagement with external reality. When we lose this capacity for return, we risk becoming prisoners of our own introspection. Total alienation can also manifest when we begin to despise everything human and social, considering ourselves superior to people who still live in more conventional ways. This attitude of superiority is, paradoxically, a sign that our solitude has become defensive instead of creative. True wisdom born from solitude generates compassion, not arrogance. Another risk is when solitude becomes addictive. Some people discover it's easier to live exclusively in their internal worlds than to face the complexities of human relationships. While the inner world is rich and fascinating, a life lived only internally gradually becomes impoverished, as it loses the creative friction that arises from encountering other perspectives and experiences. The individuation process Jung described is essentially a solitary path. Not because it needs to be traveled in complete isolation, but because no one can do it for us. Each person must discover their own essence, their own values, their own way of being in the world. This discovery requires temporary withdrawal from external expectations, family, social, cultural, that often define our identity before we even have a chance to know ourselves. For years, we live trying to correspond to images of who we should be. Ideal children, exemplary professionals, perfect partners, responsible citizens. These identities may have value, but when they become our only definition, we lose contact with who we really are underneath all these roles. Individuation is the process of discovering this authentic person who dwells beneath social masks. Jung observed that this process frequently begins in moments of crisis, when external structures that sustained our identity somehow fail or prove insufficient. A career that no longer satisfies us, a relationship that has ended, a belief we can no longer sustain. These moments of collapse, though painful, create openings to question, who am I when I'm not defined by these external circumstances? Individuation requires courage because it means accepting responsibility for creating our own life, instead of simply following pre-established scripts. It's easier to let others decide for us, but it's also a way of never living fully. The solitude necessary for individuation forces us to confront our freedom, and that can be scary for those accustomed to the security of decisions made by others. For Nietzsche, the desert metaphor was central. The Superman, his vision of the human being who transcends conventional limitations, is born in the desert, far from the oases of comfort that society offers. The desert is a place of stripping away, where all illusions and external supports are removed, forcing us to discover internal resources we didn't even know we possessed. In the desert, there are no distractions. There's no easy entertainment, social approval, or external confirmation that we're on the right path. There's only ourselves, our courage or cowardice, our capacity to create meaning even when none is offered ready-made. It's in the desert we discover if we have enough internal strength to sustain our own existence without constant external supports. Nietzsche saw this process as necessary for creating new values. While we remain in cities, metaphor for conventional social life, we simply absorb and repeat the values we find ready-made. But values that are truly ours, those that emerge from our authentic experience and reflection, can only be born in the silence of the desert, far from voices telling us what we should value. The desert is also a place of temptation. When we're alone with our thoughts long enough, all possibilities arise, the noble and the destructive. It's in isolation that we discover our capacity for both greatness and pettiness. The desert doesn't automatically make anyone wise or virtuous. It simply reveals who we really are when no one is watching. The psychological weight of solitude can be devastating for those unprepared. Anxiety, melancholy, sensation of emptiness, existential fear. All these states can emerge when we step away from habitual distractions and find ourselves alone with our inner reality. Jung saw these symptoms not as signs of weakness or illness, but as manifestations of a transformation process underway. Anxiety and solitude frequently arises from confronting uncertainty. When we no longer have constant confirmation from others about our choices and values, we begin to question everything. This uncertainty is uncomfortable, but it's also fertile soil where authenticity grows. People who never question their beliefs live more comfortable lives, but also more limited ones. The melancholy that accompanies deep solitude has a different quality from common depression. It's a philosophical sadness that arises from perceiving the complexity and ambiguity of existence. When we stop seeking simple and comfortable answers, we confront the fundamental mystery of life. This melancholy contains seeds of wisdom, as it teaches us to live with uncertainty without despair. The emptiness many experience in solitude is, paradoxically, necessary space for growth. We're so accustomed to filling every moment with external stimuli that we forget what it's like to inhabit our own internal space. This initial emptiness is like prepared earth for planting. It seems sterile, but it's ready to receive seeds of new possibilities. One of the greatest dangers of our time is systematic flight from solitude through constant distraction. Television, social media, entertainment, consumption, excessive work, all function as anesthetics against necessary confrontation with ourselves. This flight may seem innocent, but has profound consequences for our psychological and spiritual development. When we systematically avoid solitude, we lose the opportunity to process our experiences. Life events accumulate without reflection, creating a kind of existential indigestion. We live constantly reacting to external stimuli, without ever developing a consistent internal perspective. This makes us vulnerable to manipulation, and prevents us from making decisions based on our inner wisdom. Constant distraction also atrophies our capacity for deep attention. Just as muscles that aren't exercised weaken, our ability to sustain focus on complex and subtle issues diminishes when we always seek immediate and superficial stimuli. This makes us incapable of dealing with the types of existential questions that require prolonged contemplation to be understood. Addiction to distraction creates a vicious cycle. The more we avoid solitude, the more frightening it becomes when we finally find ourselves alone. Like people who avoid physical exercise and then feel uncomfortable with any physical activity, those who flee solitude develop a kind of interior agoraphobia, fear of their own thoughts and feelings. Nietzsche proposed a simple but profound test. The capacity to remain alone with oneself is a measure of inner strength. It's not lack of social skills or misanthropy. It's courage to face one's own company without needing constant entertainment or external validation. Few pass this test, because it reveals how dependent we've become on external stimuli to feel alive and valid. This courage to remain alone is intimately linked to the capacity to think for oneself. When we constantly depend on approval and opinion from others, we gradually lose contact with our own genuine thoughts and feelings. We begin to feel what we're expected to feel, think what's socially acceptable to think, desire what we've been taught to desire. Solitude reveals whether we've developed a solid internal center, or if we're merely reflections of external expectations. People with inner strength can be alone without feeling abandoned because they've cultivated a rich and interesting relationship with themselves. They have stimulating internal conversations, personal projects that inspire them, an inner life as rich as their social connections. The test of solitude also reveals our capacity for constructive self-criticism. When we're alone, we can't blame others for our problems or limitations. We're forced to assume responsibility for our internal states and our choices. This responsibility can be heavy, but it's also liberating. It means we have power for change. In Jungian psychology, the hermit archetype represents the wise figure who withdraws from the world to find truths that can only be discovered in silence and solitude. The hermit doesn't flee from life. He prepares to live it more consciously and authentically. His isolation is temporary and has specific purpose, acquiring wisdom that can later be shared with the world. The hermit symbolizes the necessary phase of retreat that precedes periods of great activity and creativity. Just as seeds need a period in the darkness of earth before sprouting, ideas and profound insights frequently require incubation in silence before they can manifest in the outer world. The hermit understands this necessity of alternation between retreat and expression. But the archetype also carries a warning. It's possible to become a prisoner of one's own mind. When the hermit loses the capacity to return to the world, his wisdom becomes sterile, and his isolation transforms into escape. The line between contemplative wisdom and neurotic obsession is thinner than it appears. The true hermit always maintains a door open for return. The danger of mental prison arises when we begin to prefer our thoughts and fantasies to concrete reality. Our inner world can become so elaborate and controlled that external reality seems crude and uninteresting in comparison. When this happens, we lose the capacity to learn from experiences that challenge our preconceived ideas. Nietzsche identified a particular trap of solitude, the temptation of resentment. When we step away from the world and develop perspectives different from most people, we might begin to nurture bitterness against those who still live conventionally. This resentment is poison that corrupts all insights gained in solitude. Resentment arises when we confuse difference with superiority. Yes, thinking for ourselves and developing authentic values makes us different from the majority. But this difference doesn't make us better as human beings. When we begin to see ourselves as superior, our solitude stops being creative and becomes defensive. We use our isolation to protect ourselves from a world we consider inferior. Nietzsche warned that resentment is particularly seductive for intelligent and sensitive people who feel misunderstood. It's tempting to create narratives where we're misunderstood heroes surrounded by superficial people. These narratives might even contain elements of truth, but when they become our main identity, they prevent us from growing and genuinely connecting with others. The solution Nietzsche proposed was transforming solitude into creative potency instead of bitter criticism. Instead of using our differentiated perception to judge the world, we should use it to create more beautiful and inspiring alternatives. True strength doesn't manifest in destructive criticism, but in creation that offers better possibilities. Both Jung and Nietzsche recognize that solitude opens doors to spiritual dimensions of human experience that remain inaccessible in the noise and agitation of constant social life. Not necessarily religious spirituality, but contact with deeper and more mysterious aspects of existence that transcend immediate mundane concerns. In quietude, we begin to perceive patterns and connections that normally go unnoticed. Life reveals a poetic and symbolic dimension that remains hidden when we're focused only on practical objectives. Dreams become more vivid, synchronicities more frequent, intuitions more reliable. It's as if diminishing external noise allows us to capture more subtle frequencies of reality. This spiritual dimension of solitude doesn't require specific beliefs, but rather openness to mystery and willingness to inhabit questions without easy answers. Many people discover in solitude a sense of connection with something greater than themselves, not necessarily a personal God, but an intelligence or underlying order to existence that normally remains obscured by superficial concerns. Spiritual experience in solitude can also include confrontation with fundamental questions. Why does something exist instead of nothing? What is the meaning of consciousness? How should we live knowing we're going to die? These questions don't have definitive answers, but contemplating them in solitude connects us with the depth of human experience in ways that social life rarely allows. The metaphor of crossing the inner desert captures the transformative essence of deep solitude. Like any genuine crossing, it's a process that has beginning, middle, and end. We start in familiar territory, our habitual identities, inherited beliefs, automatic ways of responding to life. The destination is a promised land of greater authenticity and inner freedom. But between beginning and destination stretches the desert, a period of disorientation where familiar landmarks disappear, and we must navigate using internal resources we might never have known we possessed. In the desert, illusions are burned by the scorching sun of unfiltered reality. External supports reveal themselves as mirages. We're reduced to the essential. The crossing isn't comfortable. There are moments of despair where we question whether it's worth continuing. There are temptations to return to the known, even if that means accepting a smaller life. There are periods where it seems we're not progressing, just wandering in circles. But for those who persist, the desert gradually reveals its teachings. At the end of the crossing, we discover we carried with us all along everything we needed. The journey didn't give us anything new. It removed everything superfluous, revealing resources and capabilities that were always present, but hidden by layers of social conditioning and fear. Truly transformative solitude isn't an end in itself, but preparation for a more conscious and authentic return to the world. Like the hero of mythical journeys, one who completed the crossing of the inner desert returns to community, bringing gifts, greater clarity, genuine compassion, capacity to be present without needing to perform, courage to be authentic, even when it's uncomfortable. The transformed return doesn't mean we become perfect or enlightened people. It means we develop a more mature relationship both with ourselves and with others. We no longer need constant approval because we found a solid internal center. We're not so frightened by conflict because we learned that disagreement isn't an existential threat. People who return from deep solitude frequently discover their relationships become more genuine, even if they're fewer in number. They no longer attract nor feel attracted to superficial connections, but develop capacity for authentic intimacy with those who also value depth over social convenience. The return also brings increased capacity for meaningful contribution to the world. When we're no longer wasting energy trying to be who we're not or seeking constant external validation, we free internal resources for projects and relationships that truly matter. Our creativity becomes more focused and our compassion more effective. There are moments in life when solitude isn't choice, it's the only available path. It might be triggered by loss, disillusion, inner growth that distances us from previous environments, or simply maturity that makes us less tolerant of superficiality. In these moments we can resist and suffer, or accept and use solitude as ground for growth. The challenge isn't avoiding solitude when it presents itself as a necessary path, but learning to inhabit it constructively. This means developing practices that keep us connected to our humanity even when physically alone, cultivating curiosity about our inner world, maintaining openness to learning and growth even, especially when it's uncomfortable. When solitude becomes our only path, It forces us to confront fundamental questions we might have avoided for years. Who are we when no one is watching? What do we really value when we remove social pressures? What kind of life do we want to create when we stop trying to impress others? These questions don't have easy answers, but contemplating them is essential work for any genuinely lived life. Solitude as only path also teaches us emotional self-sufficiency. We learn to comfort ourselves in difficult moments, motivate ourselves when discouraged, celebrate ourselves when we reach personal goals. These skills don't make relationships less valuable. They allow us to enter relationships by choice, not desperate necessity. The journey through solitude isn't for the faint of heart, but for those who choose authenticity over social comfort. If you recognized your own experience in these reflections, know that you're not alone in your solitude. You're part of a lineage of seekers who chose the path less traveled. Solitude may have become your only path, but it's a path that leads to inner freedom few know. Transform your isolation into sacred ground for growth. The world needs people who had courage to find themselves in solitude. If this content resonated with your inner journey, subscribe to the channel for more explorations of the deep territories of human experience, and leave your like. It helps us reach other solitary travelers who also seek to understand the mysteries of authentic existence.